Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Soul Land 2 Part 215 based on novel. So let's start. Hui Yuhao was suddenly free-falling toward the ocean. He had been tossed quite a distance away before this, so he was relatively far from his spirits as he was falling, while Tang Wutong was still unconscious as she hovered in midair. Yuhao? The Snow Empress exclaimed as she flew as fast as she could in his direction. The Princess of the Sea raised her right hand at Hui Yuhao, and a beam of blue light struck his body. No, the Snow Empress shouted as Hui Yuhao's other spirits pounced in his direction as quickly as they could. But how could they be faster than the Princess of the Sea, who was firing a beam of blue light at him? Blue light permeated the air as it swallowed Hui Yuhao's body. Hui Yuhao's 5 spirits could feel their souls quiver in that instant, and an unspeakable fear coursed over their bodies. They couldn't imagine how their futures would be if they lost Hui Yuhao in this moment. But their eyes shone brilliantly once more in the next moment. The blue light that enveloped Hui Yuhao's body immediately transformed into a layer of blue air bubbles that cocooned him. He stopped falling, and hovered in midair once more as it allowed the Snow Empress to jump over. The layer of air bubbles didn't have any offensive or defensive capabilities, like all it could do was float. The Snow Empress almost immediately returned to Hui Yuhao's body and controlled him. The murderousness in the Princess of the Sea and her daughter's eyes had completely vanished, and gentle blue light now shone from their bodies. The princess nodded in Hui Yuhao's direction and said, "I'm sorry, Snow Empress. Looks like we did have a misunderstanding before this." The Snow Empress reoriented herself and attempted to recall what had just happened. She felt extremely astonished and in disbelief, as her heart was still filled with fear even to this moment because she was afraid of losing Hui Yuhao. At the same time, she was also fearful of the shadow that Tang Wutong's 9th soul skill had drawn out. That shadow had suppressed everything around it when it appeared. It was more easily explained for spirits because they were in their spiritual forms, and their original strength was long gone. But the Princess of the Sea and her daughter weren't like that. The princess had more than 600,000 years of cultivation, and she would be ranked in the top 4 among the 10 great savage beasts if she was ranked with the ones on land. But she didn't have any intention to resist that shadow. What kind of soul skill was that it could achieve such an effect? Tang Wutong had reopened her eyes by now. A layer of bluish-golden light flickered and disappeared in the instant when she opened her eyes. Yuhao? She screamed as well before she raced in Hui Yuhao's direction and hugged him. Tang Wutong was still unleashing her martial soul, but it was evident that her 9th soul ring had turned grey. One couldn't even see that it was there without inspecting her closely. The princess and her daughter left the ocean surface and flew towards Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong. Their hostility was completely gone by now, and all that was left was an apologetic expression. They flew in front of Tang Wutong and bowed to her respectfully. "Greetings, messenger of the sea god. We express our apologies for our behavior before this. You are our beacon and guide, and we pray that the sea god's light will shine upon us for eternity." Tang Wutong nodded and said, "Now you should understand that we don't harbor ill intentions." The princess nodded hurriedly and said, "Are the 2 of you, my valued guests, willing to come into our ocean?" She could vividly remember every single word that the shadow had just said to her, and her eyes were full of eagerness and urgency as she spoke. The Snow Empress' voice came from Hui Yuhao's body as she said, "It's too late for you to understand. Let's go, Wutong. Forget about them. If you hadn't unleashed that ability of yours before this, both you and Yuhao would be in the ocean feeding fish by now." The princess's expression changed drastically as she forced a laugh and said, "I'm begging you, Snow Empress. Give us a chance. My daughter is about to die, and it's my fault. If you can save my daughter, I will agree to whatever price you wish us to pay." Her voice was full of grief and agony. Her daughter beside her began to sob at the same time, and she bent down for a deep bow. "You decide, Wutong." The Snow Empress' voice became a little more friendly. They were all soul beasts after all. Furthermore, their conflict with humans that the princess had just told her about moved her in the end. Tang Wutong nodded in the princess's direction and said, "Take us to your child." The princess was overjoyed. She bowed deeply at Tang Wutong before she raised her hands, and gentle blue light enveloped everyone. It transformed into an enormous blue air bubble before it sank into the sea. The princess lived up to her name as the Ice Sea's ruler. The blue bubble landed on the ocean surface and the seawater split around it. There wasn't a single trace of hindrance as the bubble took them deeper into the ocean. They couldn't feel a single bit of underwater pressure, and they could even breathe casually. The seawater's color grew dark. They could only see the things around them with the light shining faintly from the blue air bubble, but their visibility was low. All the aquatic soul beasts beneath the ocean automatically backed away when they felt this air bubble's aura. They were descending very quickly, and they only started to slow after roughly 10 minutes. The depths of the ocean began to light up. Tang Wutong looked, and her beautiful eyes were overcome with astonishment. An enormous patch of buildings that resembled halls and palaces were just standing there, deep beneath the ocean. They emanated faint blue colors, and lit up the surrounding several dozen kilometers. There were mermaids swimming through and around them, and every single one of these buildings was made from corals in the oceans, and all sorts of rare minerals. They weren't like true human structures, but they possessed the ocean's characteristics. For instance, Tang Wutong witnessed a mermaid who had just come out from a gigantic seashell that was 5 meters tall, and was swimming around swiftly in the ocean. This is the underwater world. It's magnificent. All the merfolk swimming around stopped when the princess of the sea and her daughter returned. They lowered their heads respectfully and expressed their reverence. The princess waved her hand, and only then did those merfolk swim away once more. They didn't dare to come near, and only those who were especially daring would stare curiously at Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong in the air bubble. Some were confused, while most felt hostile. The princess controlled the air bubble and floated to some structures that were completely made from corals. This building was also the largest one in this underwater world. The bubble gradually grew smaller as the 2 mermaids emerged from within it. They left 2 elongated bubbles that covered Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong's bodies. Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong could breathe on their own with these bubbles around, and they wouldn't feel the seawater's pressure around them. "My 2 honored guests, please." The princess used her consciousness to pass a message, and gestured at them at the same time before she went ahead to lead the way. This coral palace was extremely large. It was 30 meters tall and more than 100 meters wide. A building of such scale was rarely seen even in the human world. This palace radiated dense soul power undulations, and the building itself possessed certain offensive and defensive capabilities. Considering how deep this palace was beneath the ocean, there was no doubt about its safety. The princess and her daughter escorted Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong as they drifted inward. Of course, the Snow Empress was still controlling Hui Yuhao's body. Hui Yuhao's unconsciousness was even more absolute after he blocked an attack for Tang Wutong. Even his 5 spirits couldn't feel his spiritual undulations at all. He was in a deep slumber. It wasn't hard to see how costly using that God-sealing spell was to him. The princess and her daughter took them all the way into the palace's innermost regions, and stopped when they arrived at a pristinely white room that was constructed entirely from corals. The 2 mermaids were already overcome with grief and sadness in this moment, because they could clearly feel that their loved one's life force was becoming increasingly weaker. They opened the coral door and took Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong inside. The room was huge, and there were all kinds of ornaments and decorations inside. There were pearls the size of human heads, shells that were translucent like crystals, and gorgeous 7-colored corals. Every single item would command exorbitant prices in the human world. There was a bed in the center of the room. The bed was also white, and it seemed a little like jade as it emanated faint chills. Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong had seen something like that before. It was ice jade. Back when Hui Yuhao had first discovered the Clear Sky sect, he had completed his spirit fusion with the Snow Empress on ice jade, and had nearly made a grave mistake. There was a young mermaid lying on this bed of ice jade. She looked very similar to the other young princess, except she was a little smaller and more petite. She had flowing blue hair and a golden tail, and still radiated astonishing beauty even though she was just lying there in a deep sleep. However, her life force was so weak that it was almost undetectable. Her face was ghastly pale, and it carried a tinge of defeat. It appeared like her life was coming to an end. The princess and her daughter sobbed uncontrollably as their pearly tears floated through the water and radiated faint white light. The princess of the sea turned around and went down on her knees toward Tang Wutong. "I'm begging you, please save my child. If you can save my child, I promise I will fulfill whatever request you have." Tang Wutong arrived in front of the mermaid princess, who was in a deep slumber, and she observed her condition closely before she shook her head gently and said, "I'm sorry, Princess of the Sea. There's nothing I can do." The Princess of the Sea was momentarily stunned as tears burst out from her eyes once more. This time, her tears became like golden pearls as the entire underwater world seemed to quiver from her sobbing. "No, that's not possible. The sea god just said that you guys can save my child, so you definitely can. I'm begging you, please save my daughter. I'm willing to pay for my disrespect before this with my life." The princess was sobbing uncontrollably. Tang Wutong shook her head and said, "Princess, it's not that I'm unwilling to help you, but I really don't have that ability. Perhaps there might be something he could do if he were still awake. But he's been knocked unconscious from the battle he just had with you, and he's expended too much spiritual power." The Princess of the Sea finally understood that she had brought this upon herself. She glanced at her daughter on the ice jade bed and then at Hui Yuhao before she gritted her teeth and said, "If he's consumed too much spiritual power, then I have a solution." She raised her hand as she spoke and waved it in the water. The golden pearls that she had shed as tears gathered in front of her once more. The princess hesitated no more, and the golden pearls glowed under her control and flew in Hui Yuhao's direction. A mermaid's tears were the most valuable pearls in the world, and they contained pure spiritual energy. If normal people could obtain even a single tear, their intelligence would be enhanced, and they would even find longevity from the nourishing of their spirit. The Princess of the Sea was queen of the mermaids, and golden pearls like that only appeared when she was in extreme grief. Every single golden pearl was part of her spiritual origin, and they would naturally return to her body if they dissipated in the ocean's water. But in this moment, she directly passed the energy in her tears to Hui Yuhao. In other words, she was fusing part of her spiritual origin with him. Faint golden light circled around Hui Yuhao as they gradually diffused into his body. Hui Yuhao's spiritual aura immediately grew dense, and the Snow Empress gave up control over his body as well. She allowed Hui Yuhao to absorb the princess's spiritual power in that air bubble. Every golden pearl landed on Hui Yuhao's forehead before disappearing inside. Hui Yuhao's Eye of Destiny opened soundlessly after a few moments, and his translucent soul core deep inside his pupil spun rapidly as it absorbed the princess's vast spiritual origin from those golden pearls. Hui Yuhao's spiritual soul core was initially as deep as it could be, and everything around it was like a black hole. However, after absorbing that spiritual power, the dark soul core was slowly tainted with a golden layer as its rotation slowed. However, its aura became increasingly stable. Cultivating soul cores was the most difficult task for soul masters. Why was it so hard to improve after becoming a titled Dolor? The reason was because a titled Dolor had to continuously consolidate his soul core if he wished to improve his cultivation, and he had to increase his soul core's strength and stability. How difficult was that? Furthermore, this was a task that external forces couldn't help with at all in typical circumstances. Hui Yuhao seemed to have been blessed from his misfortune. The princess was a soul beast who could be considered one of the most adept with spiritual power in the world. Her spiritual power wasn't overbearing and dominant like the evil eye tyrant king, but was instead filled with warmth and gentleness like the ocean's water, and these golden pearls were tears that came from her spiritual origin, so they contained her purest spiritual power. There weren't any impurities in them. Therefore, Hui Yuhao didn't run into any trouble throughout the fusion process, and the golden pearls greatly nourished his soul core. Changing a soul core's fundamental qualities through cultivation was extremely difficult. What was happening to Hui Yuhao meant his spiritual soul core wasn't at its original standard anymore, and it was going through a qualitative improvement. How hard was it to undergo a qualitative improvement like that at his level of spiritual power? This qualitative change would definitely be enormously helpful for him to form his second soul core. His control would be greatly improved. The princess stopped after 49 golden pearls fused with Hui Yuhao. Her face had become a little pale, and her spiritual aura was conspicuously weaker than before. She would need tens of thousands of years of nourishment to recover after consuming so much of her spiritual origin. Of course, that wasn't important to the Princess of the Sea. The most important matter for her was to save her child. Hui Yuhao's spiritual power was nourished so much that he finally, gradually woke up from his deep slumber. The first feeling he had when he opened his eyes was how clear this world was. He didn't need spiritual detection for everything around him to be in his senses, and that feeling was just too magical. Eh? Is this the underwater world? Hui Yuhao regained his memory as he immediately snapped his head to one side. He heaved a huge sigh of relief when he saw a pair of large pinkish-blue eyes staring right at him. Hui Yuhao felt very warm and wonderful when he saw Tang Wutong's concerned eyes as she stared at him. She was most concerned about him, no matter when and where. "I'm all right, don't worry." Tang Wutong held his hand and gently leaned against him. "That's great." Hui Yuhao reoriented himself before he turned towards the Princess of the Sea. The princess seemed very frail, but her eyes were filled with hope as she stared at Hui Yuhao and begged, "I'm sorry, my respected human friend. We have misunderstood you before this, and I am begging you to heal my daughter. If you can save her, the merfolk are willing to do anything to return this favor." Even though Hui Yuhao didn't know what had happened, he could tell from the princess's attitude that they should have reconciled their conflict. Hui Yuhao then turned to the mermaid princess lying on the ice jade bed. Of course, he understood what the Princess of the Sea was saying. That was especially so because this mermaid princess's aura had become extremely weak. It wouldn't be long before she would leave this world forever. "All right, let me take a look at your daughter first." He didn't have time to ask about what had happened as he arrived next to the ice jade bed. The air bubble that was protecting him shifted and followed his footsteps very strangely. Hui Yuhao activated spiritual detection, and it stretched like an enormous web over the mermaid princess. Hui Yuhao realized to his surprise that his spiritual power seemed to have undergone another qualitative enhancement. It had become like his purple demon eyes, and possessed a kind of ability that could go into very intricate detail. Furthermore, his spiritual power had become a lot more consolidated. Hui Yuhao inspected her closely for a while, and discovered what the mermaid princess's problem was as he frowned tightly. The princess's situation is not very optimistic. "I'm afraid I don't have the ability to heal her." The Princess of the Sea and her daughter's faces changed drastically when they heard his words, and their eyes grew dim. They were also very adept with spiritual power and had already conducted all kinds of checks on their little princess. Naturally, they knew what the problem was. Hui Yuhao continued, "The princess's spirit must have been severely injured. There isn't any problem with her body, but her spirit has been separated from her body. Furthermore, her spirit is fragmented and incomplete, while her origin has been heavily damaged. This is the reason why her spiritual sea and her life energy are dissipating so quickly. I'm afraid she can't make it another day. If not for the fact that the princess's spiritual power is sufficiently strong, she might have." The princess forced back her grief and asked, "Is there really nothing you can do?" Hui Yuhao contemplated for a moment. "Princess of the Sea, can you tell me how she became like this? What kind of enemy hurt her? I need to know what kind of injury her spirit has suffered before I can think of a way to help her." The Princess of the Sea hurriedly nodded before she recounted the same story she had told the Snow Empress. Hui Yuhao immediately understood after listening to her description. It seems like the princess must have been hurt by evil soul masters. That evil soul master wanted to turn her spirit into an avenging spirit, so he used special methods to strip her soul away. He filled her spirit with intense resentment and hatred during the extraction process, as only then can the princess's soul maintain its tremendous strength after becoming an avenging spirit. But he hadn't completed his extraction process when you rescued her, and that's the cause of this current situation. Did you see what the princess was like when her soul was being stripped away? I need to know what happened, and how much of her spirit has been taken away, and which part. That's the only way I can save her." The Princess of the Sea shook her head and said, "I don't know all that. She was like that when I rescued her, and we couldn't stay in that place for long, so we hurried back. We thought that we would definitely have a way to save her with our own abilities, but Hui Yuhao frowned and said, "Since that's the case, I can only take a risk and try." The princess didn't hesitate at all. "That's all right, just do what you need to. The child is bound to die if you don't try, and even if you fail, that's just her bad luck." The princess's trust made Hui Yuhao relax a little. He nodded and said, "I have to find out how her soul was being stripped away. I will use abilities similar to that of an evil soul mastered during the searching process, so please don't misunderstand." "All right, I will protect you," the princess answered without any hesitation. She only had a single thread of hope left in her heart, and she would probably lose her child forever if she let this opportunity slip. She had already decided that this little daughter would eventually be her heir. Hui Yuhao took a deep breath. He was brimming with spiritual power in this moment, and could use any spiritual type ability very casually. Deep chanting sounds could be heard as a grey soul ring appeared on Hui Yuhao's body, and his aura became dark and sinister. The Princess of the Sea and her daughter would have panicked in fear if he hadn't warned them beforehand. But Hui Yuhao's words and the shadow that Tang Wutong had released before this calmed them down, and they stared earnestly at Hui Yuhao. This was their last hope. The incantations were lengthy as Hui Yuhao's body radiated dense spiritual power continuously, gradually forming a grey glyph in front of him. This glyph was very unique. It looked like a human face, and it was still blurry in the beginning, but gradually appeared to be identical to the mermaid princess's appearance, who was still unconscious. But it was completely grey. "Go?" Hui Yuhao growled as his incantations stopped. The glyph that was shaped like a human face swiftly floated towards the mermaid princess, and descended and landed on her face. The mermaid princess's body quivered vigorously once before she began to tremble, and an illusory picture drifted out from her head. The image wasn't large, only 1/2 meter in diameter. But it was clear enough for everyone to see. The image presented the mermaid princess, but she was tied onto a wooden frame with more than 10 metal chains. Wasn't that the myriad soul Dolor standing in front of her? The myriad soul Dolor was chanting something, and he waved the myriad soul banner in his hands continuously. Enormous avenging spirits howled from time to time as they encircled the mermaid princess. There were many strange tools and items laid out around her. There were skulls, and there were other soul beasts' bones and skeletons. The mermaid princess cried out agonizingly again and again, and her body trembled vigorously. She was clearly in a lot of pain. The Princess of the Sea and her daughter couldn't bear to look, and they closed their eyes. Time reversal. This was a powerful necromantic spell that Electrolux had left behind for Hui Yuhao. It demanded too much from an individual's soul, which was why Hui Yuhao had never used it. He was taking a risk by attempting it today, and he didn't think that he would succeed on his first try. Hui Yuhao's formidable spiritual power was the important guarantee so that he could complete this spell. Of course, that was also because the mermaid princess was unconscious and couldn't possibly resist him. The shadows in the image were illusory, and some were a little blurry. It was evident how much pain the mermaid princess was in back then. It didn't take long before another illusory shadow appeared from her head. This image was just like her own head, but it looked very sinister, as her eyes were bloodshot. Hui Yuhao was momentarily stunned when he saw this. He immediately recalled that, back during his fight with the Myriad Soul Dolor, wasn't this the most formidable avenging spirit in his Myriad Soul banner? So the Myriad Soul Dolor's mermaid avenging spirit came from this mermaid princess. The situation in the image changed once more. The Myriad Soul Dolor seemed to be startled, and he stopped his incantations as he swung his Myriad Soul banner. The mermaid avenging spirit was sucked into it before he walked away. The images stopped as the shadows dissipated, and everything returned to its original state. The mermaid princess's circumstance seemed to become worse on the ice jade bed, and her life energy was almost undetectable. So, can she be saved? The Princess of the Sea asked eagerly. Hui Yuhao forced a laugh and said, "I'm afraid that's not possible. The princess's soul has taken a fatal injury, and maybe not even a god can do anything about this. From what we just saw, that evil soul master must have taken away part of her soul. He used certain methods to frighten her, and he gave her the most intense pain and agony so that she developed all kinds of negative feelings. When these negative feelings started entering her soul, the evil soul master used special methods to extract these negative feelings and fuse them with part of her soul. He then stripped away that part of her soul and transformed it into an avenging spirit. If you hadn't appeared in time, the princess might have really completely become an avenging spirit. If that had happened, the evil soul master would have definitely become a lot more powerful. But even then, her spiritual origin has been damaged, and only half of her soul remains. She can't possibly survive something like this, and her spiritual sea is completely dried up, while that is the same for her life energy. She is faced with certain death. The princess of the sea fell silent when she heard Hui Yuhao's words. Of course, she knew that his words were true. She had tried everything she could over the past few days to try and heal her daughter, but everything was futile. Hui Yuhao's description confirmed her own speculations, and no matter how much she wasn't willing to admit it, she knew that it was the truth. Is there really nothing you can do? The princess of the sea's other daughter, the mermaid princess with the silver crown, asked worriedly. Hui Yuhao fell silent for a moment, then said, "There is a very slim chance that perhaps I can prolong the mermaid princess's life. But I cannot guarantee that it will be successful. Furthermore, even if I do succeed, she won't be the same mermaid princess as before." The princess of the sea's eyes glowed. It doesn't matter what she becomes as long as she can survive. She was just a mother in this moment, and she had already given up any thought of her little daughter taking over her throne. All she wanted was for her daughter to live. Hui Yuhao hesitated for a few moments, then said, "I can try to fuse with her spirit. If I'm successful, then she will continue living as a spirit. If I fail, then her spirit will vanish." The princess and her daughter's expressions changed when they heard those words. Her spirit would vanish. That meant she would be obliterated from the world, and would disappear forever. Faint light flickered as Hui Yuhao turned towards the princess of the sea. "If we don't try this, her spirit will dissipate. You are aware of her current state, and we can't rely on any other force to keep her fragmented soul together. Her soul is like a crystal that is completely cracked open, and part of it has been taken away. We can only use the contract so that those cracks can be pieced back together and healed. Please, make your decision quickly. The longer you drag this out, the lower our chance of success." "Yuhao?" Tang Wutong suddenly called his name. Hui Yuhao turned around to Tang Wutong. She shook her head at him, and her eyes were full of disapproval. They had been together for so long, and they understood each other's thoughts very well. He naturally knew why Tang Wutong would object. This mermaid princess who was in deep slumber had suffered so much pain and agony by human hands, and she would definitely awaken during the process. The most important requirement for spirit fusion was that the soul beast had to be cooperative. Everything would be futile if that wasn't the case. The mermaid princess had suffered so much pain at the hands of that evil soul master. How could she cooperate with Hui Yuhao? He would have to take a very vigorous backlash if he failed. The mermaid princess was a 100,000-year soul beast, and she was also a spiritual-type soul beast. If she fought against Hui Yuhao, the backlash would be very strong, and he would likely be severely injured. His chances of success would be a lot smaller than any of his previous fusions. That was the reason why Tang Wutong objected. She believed that he was wasting his time. Hui Yuhao shook his head at her gently, and determination surfaced in his eyes. He was determined to help the mermaid princess, but that wasn't because he wanted a spirit out of this so that he could give his spirit eyes its 8th soul ring. The reason he wanted to do this was because he sought understanding from these aquatic soul beasts. Their expedition deep into the ice sea had allowed him to witness how vast and formidable the aquatic soul beasts were, and he had witnessed how powerful they were. If aquatic soul beasts continued to view humans as enemies, then rivers would run with blood in the future. Even though the ice sea was within the Sun Moon Empire's territory, this was still something that Hui Yuhao didn't want to see. He hoped that spirits could be spread to every corner of the earth, and that was the reason why this opportunity was so important. The princess of the sea would trust him if he succeeded, and that would be extremely beneficial for aquatic soul beasts to join the Spirit Pagoda's endeavors in the future. When that happened, more soul masters wouldn't need to hunt and kill soul beasts for soul rings. That was the best outcome. So, Hui Yuhao was willing to take this risk. He could feel that his spiritual power was improving. He wasn't sure whether or not this attempt would be successful, but he still had to try, even if it would result in him being severely injured. A deep voice rang out in this moment. The Princess of the Sea sniffled as she said, "All right, I agree. Please do it. You will always be our friend, no matter how this turns out." Hui Yuhao turned towards the princess and then at her daughter next to her. He nodded heavily in their direction before he came beside the ice jade bed. If Tang Wutong hadn't released her 9th soul ring, they would never trust a human. But their hostility had completely disappeared after that shadow appeared from her 9th soul ring, and it even dispelled all the murderousness and resentment in every other aquatic soul beast's hearts in this area. There was only hope in the princess and her daughter's hearts. Faint light flickered as ice-cold light radiated from Hui Yuhao's face. Deep incantations could be heard once more. They were at the bottom of the ocean. He was limited by his circumstances, so there was no way he could carve a magic formation to support him. The mermaid princess's situation also meant that he couldn't delay any further, and he had to begin right away. This video will end here.